If I told you there was an island in the North Atlantic Ocean that has destroyed hundreds of ships, buried their remains beneath the sand, become home to wild horses, and somehow continues to change year after year, you would probably assume there's something unusual about it. But even that wouldn't prepare you for the strangest part, because this island doesn't seem to stay the same. For centuries, sailors, explorers, and scientists have watched parts of it appear, disappear, and shift over time. Old maps don't always match newer ones. Certain areas seem to grow while others slowly fade away. And despite years of research, the island continues to behave in ways that most islands simply don't. Its name is Sable Island. Sitting alone in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, far off the coast of Canada, Sable Island looks surprisingly fragile from above. It's long and narrow, like a thin ribbon of sand stretched across the ocean. At first glance, it doesn't look dangerous. In fact, it barely looks permanent. Yet this isolated strip of land has earned one of the most chilling nicknames in maritime history, the Graveyard of the Atlantic. And once you hear what happened here, you'll understand why. Over the centuries, more than 350 ships have been lost around Sable Island. Think about that for a second. More than 350 entire vessels vanished in these waters. Merchant ships carrying cargo, fishing boats, military escorts. Some crews survived long enough to crawl onto the island's beaches. Others disappeared into the Atlantic forever. What's strange is that when you look at Sable Island today, it doesn't seem like the kind of place that should be so deadly. There are no towering cliffs waiting to smash ships apart, no jagged volcanic rocks sticking out of the water, nothing that immediately explains why sailors feared this place for generations. And yet they did, because many of the ships that entered these waters never came back out. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Most shipwrecks leave behind evidence: rusting metal, broken wood, pieces of history scattered across the shoreline. Sable Island does something different. It hides them. Over time, shipwrecks that wash ashore are slowly swallowed by the island itself. The sand covers them layer by layer until entire vessels disappear beneath the surface. Some remain hidden for decades. Others remain hidden for centuries. It's almost as if the island is collecting pieces of history and storing them underground. And every now and then, it gives one back. In the spring of 2025, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a ship believed to be the Swift, a British sailing vessel that ran aground here in September of 1812. For more than 200 years, the wreck had remained buried beneath the sand. Storms came and went, generations passed, and all that time, the island kept it hidden. The excavation itself looked more like a treasure hunt than an archaeological dig. Researchers used drones, detailed mapping equipment, and high-precision GPS systems to document every plank, nail, and fragment they uncovered. Sand was carefully removed layer by layer, first using machinery and then by hand, until the outline of the wreck finally began to emerge. Then they found something unexpected. Among the remains was a brass ship block, stamped with a British broad arrow, a symbol associated with the Royal Navy. That small detail helped connect the discovery to HMS Barbados, a British escort frigate that had also been wrecked in the area during the same period. Suddenly, what seemed like a single shipwreck became part of a much larger story involving an entire convoy that met disaster in these waters more than 2 centuries ago. But the most surprising part came after the excavation was finished. The archaeologists buried the wreck again, not because they wanted to hide it, but because that is actually the safest place for it. The same sand that concealed the wreck for centuries also protected it. Buried beneath the dunes, the wood remained shielded from sunlight, air, and decay. In a strange way, Sable Island acts like a giant natural archive, preserving pieces of history beneath its surface and revealing them only when it chooses to. And the longer you look at this island, the more it starts to feel like that's exactly what it does. It hides things, it changes, it reshapes itself. And somehow, despite all of that, life has still managed to thrive here in ways that seem almost impossible. At this point, you might assume Sable Island is the kind of place where very little can survive. After all, this is a remote strip of sand sitting alone in the North Atlantic, constantly battered by storms and surrounded by some of the roughest waters in the region. It has swallowed shipwrecks, frustrated sailors, and spent centuries reshaping itself. It doesn't exactly sound like the ideal place to build a home. And yet, somehow, hundreds of wild horses live here. Not in a fenced reserve, not on a farm, completely wild. For many visitors, this is actually the most surprising thing about Sable Island. You can be standing on a remote Atlantic beach, thousands of kilometers from most major cities, and suddenly see a herd of horses moving across the dunes as if they own the island. And in a way, they do. The story of how they arrived here is still debated, but horses have been on Sable Island for centuries. Some were brought by settlers in the 1700s, while others arrived later. Over time, they were left to fend for themselves, and eventually, they became completely feral. Today, around 400 to 500 horses roam freely across the island, protected by law and left almost entirely untouched by humans. What makes them fascinating isn't just that they exist here, it's that they somehow survive here. Because Sable Island offers none of the comforts that horses normally rely on. There are no barns, no feeding stations. No one brings them water during dry periods. Every horse on the island survives entirely on what nature provides. During the winter, temperatures drop, powerful storms sweep across the dunes, and icy winds blow in from the Atlantic. To cope with these conditions, the horses grow thick, shaggy coats that make them look almost like a different species. Their manes become longer, their bodies become stockier, and their dense fur helps them survive months of cold weather that would challenge many domestic horses. Food presents another challenge. Most horses spend their lives grazing on fields and pastures. Sable Island doesn't offer much of that. Instead, the horses feed on hardy grasses, low-growing plants, and whatever vegetation manages to survive in the island's harsh environment. But what really surprised researchers was discovering that the horses don't stop there. They also eat seaweed. After storms, large amounts of kelp and marine algae wash onto the beaches. Rather than ignoring it, the horses often feed on it, supplementing their diet with food that most people would never expect a horse to eat. It's one of many adaptations that have allowed them to survive on an island where survival shouldn't be easy. Water can be just as difficult to find. There are no rivers here, no mountain streams. Instead, horses often rely on rain-fed ponds or dig into the sand to reach fresh water hidden below the surface. The more you learn about them, the more they seem perfectly designed for this strange place. They form family groups led by a dominant stallion. Mothers raise their foals among the dunes. Young males gather together in bachelor groups until they eventually establish herds of their own. Researchers have documented complex social behavior, including displays of dominance, communication, and cooperation that closely resemble wild horse populations elsewhere in the world. But life on Sable Island is far from easy. Not every horse survives. Scattered beneath the dunes are the remains of generations that didn't make it through harsh winters, storms, or difficult years. Foals are especially vulnerable. Some never survive their first winter. Nature is unforgiving here, and there are no veterinarians waiting to intervene when things go wrong. Yet, despite all of this, the horses remain. And strangely enough, they succeeded where humans repeatedly failed. Because for more than a century, people tried to change Sable Island. They tried to tame it. They tried to make it more stable. And one of the most ambitious attempts involved something that sounds almost ridiculous today. They tried to build a forest. In 1901, thousands of trees and shrubs were brought to Sable Island. The goal was simple. If roots could anchor the sand, perhaps the island would become more stable. Perhaps it would stop changing so dramatically. On paper, it sounded like a reasonable solution. Reality was much harsher. The island's powerful winds, salty air, poor soil, and constantly shifting landscape wiped out almost everything that was planted. By 1913, only a tiny fraction of the original plants remained alive. Decades later, another attempt was made when 2 Scotch pine trees were planted near one of the island's ponds. Only one survived. That lone pine became famous among researchers and visitors. Year after year, Atlantic winds twisted and bent it into a strange dwarf-like shape. It looked less like a tree and more like something struggling to survive. Eventually, even that tree died. Before it did, wild horses had developed a habit of using it as a scratching post. Today, Sable Island remains almost completely treeless, but by now, there's still one question we haven't answered. Why is Sable Island moving at all? The answer turns out to be both simple and fascinating. Sable Island isn't really a normal island. It's essentially a giant sandbar. Nearly the entire island is made of sand that has been shaped and reshaped by Atlantic currents, powerful winds, and relentless storms. Unlike rocky islands that remain relatively fixed for thousands of years, Sable Island is constantly being rebuilt. Every storm moves sand from one location to another. Dunes migrate across the landscape. Beaches expand in some places, while disappearing in others. The island is caught in an endless cycle of erosion and renewal, and once you understand that, suddenly everything starts making sense. Sable Island isn't moving because something unusual happened to it. It's moving because that's what it has always done. Most islands feel permanent. They feel like fixed points on a map. We look at them and assume they'll always be there, unchanged and unmoving. Sable Island quietly challenges that idea. While the rest of us think of maps as something permanent, Sable Island has spent thousands of years proving that even the land beneath our feet doesn't always stay the same. And right now, as you're watching this, it's still changing.